You know that sinking feeling that he's growing distant, and it's really just impossible to ignore? You need answers, hon. This tarot spread is going to expose the hidden truth behind his emotional shift and really what it means for your relationship. Um, it's a gut-wrenching feeling, isn't it? When you just know that something is wrong and he's pulling away, the silence gets a little bit louder, the texts get a little bit more shorter and distant, and the space between you kind of feels like the Grand Canyon. So, you're left kind of searching for the answers, he isn't giving you. Replaying every single, conversation in your head, wondering what's going on, what you did wrong. Is he losing interest? Is there someone else? All these things that go through our heads when this happens, this anxiety is just exhausting, and it completely steals your peace. And that's really not fair. So in this reading, we're going to cut through the chase and cut to the chase and cut through the confusion. We're going to draw 3 cards, and we're going to get to the heart of what's really going on here. So the first card will show us what, has led up to this. And the second card is going to reveal, the current issues at play. And the third card, this is going to tell us how he really is feeling, and whether or not there's somebody else, So this is all about getting you the clarity and stuff that you really deserve so that you can make decisions that are right for you. So just take a moment and take a deep breath, and, kind of bring his face into your mind. Focus on, the connection between you and share the question that's been on your mind, out with the universe. And we'll pull the cards and see what the answers are. And just a gentle reminder, this is a general reading. It's not for every single person. Not every single detail out there is going to fit your situation perfectly. So take the message as it is, take what resonates deep down, and leave the rest. And, because tarot is an amazing tool for guidance, but it's not the substitute for your own intuition. So, anyway, all right, so let's get started here. Our first card is explaining what has led up to this distance. This card is, the Hierophant, and this is all about fear and illusion, subconscious mind. He's pulling away not because he's lost in a landscape of his own deep-seated fears, but he's lost because of his insecurities. The Hierophant really represents all these anxieties that creep in, and, he can't see clearly. He might not even be able to explain why he feels this way, but he's dealing with, some pretty powerful undercurrents. He's got a lot of doubts, and they're often tied to fear. Fear of commitment and fear of being truly vulnerable. Past wounds, he's got a lot of them, apparently. He's projecting these, onto your connection and making him question everything. He's retreating, not because of you. It has nothing to do with you, really. It's because relationships in the past, have been murky, and this one is stirring up some unexplored parts of his own mind, hon. So our second card, this card reveals the current, the five of Wands here. This is all about the regret and focusing on what's been lost. The current issue is, that his fear is coming from past disappointments. He's never really actually gotten over them or dealt with them. So he's kind of emotionally stuck in the past, and being with you is starting to kind of stir all that stuff up, and it's hard for him to deal with. This means that he's operating from a place of loss and likely terrified that this relationship will, end the same way that the painful other relationships have ended. This fear of history repeating itself is actually kind of causing, a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. He's fixated on what could go wrong, and therefore he's distancing, and honestly creating the problems that he's afraid of, if that makes sense. So the third card we have the Ace of Cups. And, this is telling me, how he's really feeling, and addressing the question of whether there's someone else or not. The Ace of Cups here is telling me that no, that's not about somebody else. He's feeling hesitant and cautious and a little bit like a beginner. The Ace of Cups in this, is more like a student. He feels new to this and wanting to build something real and tangible, but he's just incredibly terrified and unsure of his steps. He's afraid of messing up. His feelings are more grounded in a practical desire to get it right this time, rather than, just being swept away, in emotional, lusty kind of things. Now whether there's someone else or not, I don't think so. This card is suggesting that, his focus is on you. He just has to take things, kind of slow and methodical. There's no energy here for another person. All of his attention is consumed by you. He's just really super cautious, and his fear of repeating past mistakes, that's what's causing this distance. So I really hope that this validates what you're feeling. And, I hope that it truly brought you some peace and clarity this evening. I really, just want you to keep this in mind. Like I said, generalized reading, take what resonates, leave the rest. You have the power to, keep your own peace and happiness, and it should never depend on another person. But, this has the potential for being a good, long-lasting relationship. You just kind of have to work with him a little bit, and stuff, and maybe, kind of baby step with him a little bit, if that makes sense. So if this message is for you and resonates, please leave me a comment. I read all your comments. Like and subscribe, and share if this belongs to a friend of yours. I hope that this experience is deeply meaningful for you, and you take care. Buy the Cat Council a treat if you feel like it, and you have a good rest of your evening, and I'll be back again soon. And also, one last thing, if you'd like to book a private reading with me, I do have Hypesy.com. That's Hypesy.com/Pansy McGee, Pansy_McGee, MCGEE. Over, like I said, at Hypesy.com. I also, at my Ko-fi, I can put the link in the description box below. I do personalized readings and spells. If you need like some energy cleansed in your house or something like that, check out the services that I offer there. There's some interesting things, birth charts and so forth. So you take care. I'll be back again soon. Bye.